Tim Ballard, the man who inspired the Sound of Freedom movie, whose life the movie was based on, has been denounced by the Mormon church, his church, for morally unacceptable behavior. But there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of allegations surrounding this story and a lot of misinformation going around about it. So let's dig in and see if we can figure out what the heck is going on. Welcome to No Culty Vibes. I'm your host, Cassie Marie. I'm a former cult hopper, artist, and content creator. And today we are going to talk about Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad and some of the most recent allegations and scandals that have been reported about that topic. But before we get started, if you could hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in seeing more culty content. You can also find me on TikTok and Instagram at the.cassiemarie, or you can check out my podcast if you prefer listening instead of watching. If you're on the podcast, you can find me on YouTube if you want to watch instead of listen. Both of those are No Culty Vibes. I'm also slowly getting my shit together and making some of my art available for you guys to purchase. So if you're interested in some culty themed art, some culty merch, digital prints, even some coloring pages, make sure you check out the link in the description, the link in the show notes, the link in my bio, depending on where you're listening to this, to see what I have available and get an idea of what's coming. Before we get started with this topic, I do want to give a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about child sex trafficking as well as sexual assault of varying different natures in this episode. So please take care if you're watching or listening. Maybe if you feel like you need to skip this entirely altogether, I totally understand. You know what's best for you. Trust yourself and take care. So if you're new to this story and you're wondering why is Tim Ballard or the Sound of Freedom movie or Operation Underground Railroad culty, what does it have to do with like pop culture, things like that? You can check out my TikTok series on TikTok, or I've also posted it on YouTube, where I do a deep dive into the Sound of Freedom movie, some of the criticisms behind that and Operation Underground Railroad, and its ties to the Mormon church and how Tim Ballard himself is a pretty culty, grifty guy. I also highly recommend that you check out the Mormon Stories podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. They've done some great episodes digging into Operation Underground Railroad and Tim Ballard, and of course, the Mormon Church. And I also recommend that you check out Lynn Packer on YouTube, who has been covering this for a number of years. And Vice News has been writing articles about this since 2020. We are going to dig into mainly the Vice News articles today, but you can just Google Vice News Tim Ballard and see a lot of articles kind of digging into some of the criticisms around Tim and this organization. Mormon Stories podcast also has interviewed the journalists that have written a lot of these articles for Vice News. So they are able to kind of come on and explain their process and where they get their sources from and what they've heard and who they've heard it from. So I really love those episodes for more clarity. So if you're really wanting to dig into this, that is where you can get all of this information. So over this past weekend, I started seeing reports, rumblings, posts online saying that the Mormon church had denounced Tim Ballard for morally questionable or morally unacceptable behavior. It wasn't clear to me at first, like where this was coming from or what actually happened or what the morally unacceptable behavior was. I did see that there was a video circulating of Tim Ballard kind of freaking out about this. And Glenn Beck, who is also very closely connected to Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, like threw a little bit of a hissy fit on Twitter and then deleted the tweets and just tweeted that like God knows what's going on or some very generic kind of vague tweet about it. But he was really upset. He was like, my church would never do this. Why would the Mormon church denounce something without giving any reason? Like, where is this coming from? And it started sparking a lot of controversy that maybe the Mormon church wasn't doing this at all, that like it couldn't have been them. It didn't come through official channels and just all kinds of things. And then I think on Monday or like not long after that, something else was going around saying that Tim Ballard was being accused of being sexually inappropriate with some women on some of Operation Underground Railroad's jumps or operations that they would go on in order to save children from sex trafficking overseas. I even thought as I first started making videos about this and when this news was breaking, I was like, this is so weird. It's seemingly out of nowhere that the Mormon church is just like, oh yeah, by the way, we're not down with that Tim Ballard guy. Like we're not into it. Don't connect us to him. I guess Tim Ballard has had connections with an elder from the church named Russell M. Russell Ballard. No relation, allegedly. They are not family. They just happen to have the same last name. But the church, it just seemed like it was all out of nowhere. And I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. And then when these allegations dropped, it's like, oh, well, maybe the Mormon church or someone got wind of this and wanted to distance themselves from Tim Ballard before all of this news dropped. Well, thanks to the Mormon Stories podcast and Tim Marchman and Anna Merlin from Vice News, I realized I'd found out that Vice News had published a new article about Tim Ballard, Operation Underground Railroad, the Mormon Church, because they had reached out to the Mormon Church for comment on one of the articles that they were writing about Tim Ballard and his connections to Elder Ballard apparently a while ago, and the Mormon church just responded to their request for comment for the articles that they were reading. And in that response, that's when they denounced Tim Ballard, Operation Underground Railroad. They said that they never recommended it, were never affiliated with him. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But this didn't come out of nowhere. This came from people who have been reporting on this news since 2020, finally getting a response to a request for comment from the Mormon church. And that's also why this didn't come through like normal channels. This wasn't the church making an official like PR statement on their own, like through the way that they normally do that. This was a response to a request for comment. So this is the Vice News article in question that shared the Mormon Church's statement denouncing Tim Ballard. Vice News was digging into some information that they found through some documents that they were able to obtain, where Tim Ballard claimed that an elder of the church, possibly the acting president of the LDS church, a man named M. Russell Ballard, was involved heavily in Operation Underground Railroad and in some business entities that Tim Ballard started as a way to funnel some money from his nonprofits into a for-profit company that was allegedly supposed to help make him famous and provide him with a lot of money so that he could then preach about and lead people to the Mormon church. One of the first things that they claimed, or one of the first things that was in these documents, said that Tim Ballard would often talk about Russell Ballard and say that as an elder of the church, he was like very intimately aware of Operation Underground Railroad's missions, that he would pray for Tim Ballard and his wife before he would carry out these missions. And then they would also report back to him and keep him in the loop throughout whatever they were doing. Another really wild thing about this article is that Vice News apparently obtained documents detailing the fact that Tim Ballard used a psychic named Janet Rousson, who would talk to dead Mormon leaders, and specifically a prophet named Nephi, to get information on children that had been trafficked and information to like where Operation Underground Railroad should go to look for specific children. And I'll probably talk more about this later, but people thought that that was wild that he would use a psychic to try to locate children. And whenever they would ask him about it, he would kind of make it sound like this was all above board and approved by the Mormon church. And Tim Ballard would often say, "Oh, I told Elder Ballard about it. So it's fine. Like, this is all great. This is all what we like. It's what we should be doing. And it's all real and it's all fine." Another one of these allegations is this connection between the Mormon church and Elder Russell Ballard and this whiteboard that has been reported on several times by Lynn Packer and Vice News and Mormon Stories podcast, where allegedly Tim Ballard put this meeting together where he showed how all of his nonprofit entities would feed into his personal brand and then into a for-profit company. And that for-profit company would give him the money that he needed to lead people to the Mormon church. This is a picture of that whiteboard from the meeting. Like I said, this has circulated a few places, and AmericanCrimeJournal.com shared this. Lynn Packer kind of reconstructed the diagram so that we can look at it and see what it said. And it showed how money could flow from the Child Liberation Foundation into OUR and the Nazarene Fund, which is Glenn Beck's charity, where Glenn Beck allegedly rescues religiously oppressed people from different countries. But that's neither here nor there. It was all these nonprofits that would all funnel to timballard.com, which is where Tim Ballard would, produce a lot of these movies like The Sound of Freedom. He would have this money in a bank account. He would do speaking gigs. He would write books. And all of this money would go into Slave Stealers LLC. And in text messages, Tim Ballard said that Russell Ballard, the elder of the Mormon church, would be a partner in Slave Stealers LLC, along with a man named Brian Norton. In another document obtained by Vice News, the Davis County Attorney's Office interviewed David Lopez, who was a former Navy SEAL and led the ops team at OUR, and he detailed how Tim Ballard said multiple times that it was his job to use the sizzle of the rescue to lead people back to the Mormon covenant. So if you had noticed on that whiteboard that was recreated, they put sizzle in parentheses under a lot of those nonprofits because they were using the emotion and the extravagant nature of the child trafficking and the Operation Underground Railroad drops to promote Tim Ballard and to make these movies so that Tim Ballard could be this type of messiah that would lead people back to the Mormon covenant. He really saw himself as a celebrity for the Mormon church. And if you have followed my content at all for any length of time, you know that I talk a lot about celebrities and cults and how cults use celebrities to prop up their message. They use them to not only bring people in and bring a lot of money in to the cult, but also as a way to show people within the cult how successful you can be if you are applying their beliefs, their philosophies, and their teachings in the exact perfect and right way. And Tim Ballard wanted to be that celebrity for the Mormon church. And it seems like he wanted to profit himself off of that as well. He really wanted to be elevated to that status in all of the ways. And he often alleged that Elder Russell Ballard was working with him on that agenda. It's also a really common cult tactic to use emotionally charged subjects like Save the Children to kind of indoctrinate people into your belief system. It makes people question things a lot less and operate more on their emotional center than on critical thought. And it makes it harder to oppose. I don't know if you've noticed, but when people try to oppose the Sound of Freedom movie and just share some very real and relevant criticisms, they're just viciously attacked by anyone that doesn't want to hear it or doesn't want to listen, because people are like, how could you oppose saving the children? When in reality, no one is opposing saving the children. We all want to save the children. Everybody wants the children saved, but we also want to make sure that that's what's actually happening, that these organizations are actually doing what they're saying they're going to do, and that they're providing people with informed consent when they donate, and that people know what they're doing. A lot of people didn't know or realize that Tim Ballard was using a psychic to channel a Mormon prophet to tell them where to go on these jumps or on these rescues. Donors were also not aware that Tim's mission was ultimately to bring America back to the covenant or bring Americans back to the Mormon church, not just save the children. There was an underlying motive behind all of this. And this was again echoed by a woman who was interviewed by people, and the interview was in the documents obtained by Vice News. So this was all what Vice News was trying to get a statement on and get clarity on, is how connected is Tim Ballard to the Mormon church, and to what degree is this an underlying motive of the Sound of Freedom movie and Operation Underground Railroad. And that's when the Mormon church said President Ballard and Tim Ballard, no relation, established a friendship a number of years ago. That friendship was built on a shared interest in looking after God's children wherever they are without regard to their circumstance. However, that relationship is in the past. For many months, President Ballard has had no contact with the founder of Operation Underground Railroad. The nature of that relationship was always in support of vulnerable children being abused, trafficked, and otherwise neglected. Once it became clear Tim Ballard had betrayed their friendship through the unauthorized use of President Ballard's name for Tim Ballard's personal advantage and activity regarded as morally unacceptable, President Ballard withdrew his assent. President Ballard never authorized its name or the name of the church to be used for Tim's personal or financial interests. In addition, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints never endorsed, supported, or represented OUR, Tim Ballard, or any projects associated with them. President Ballard loves children all over the world. It has been his mission and life's work to look after them, care for them, and point them to their Savior. So that's what the Mormon church was denouncing. Except, even in this statement, it's not entirely accurate, because after they submitted this statement, they went back to a lot of their websites and scrubbed any mention of Tim Ballard or Operation Underground Railroad from any of their websites. They have more or less endorsed him in the past. They haven't, I don't know that the church has flat out said, like, everyone go support this organization and give your money to OUR or Tim Ballard or whatever. But they have talked about him and they have recommended it in the past. And they have, like, there were things on their website that he was involved with. So take that for what you will. So I feel like it wasn't super clear from the Mormon Church's statement what morally unacceptable behavior of Tim Ballard's they were specifically referring to. And I incorrectly assumed that this was going around and they released this statement because something else was coming that they knew about. The reality is that statement was in response to the request for statement by the Vice News journalist, but this article did come out right after that. And it's a Vice News article titled Tim Ballard's Departure from Operation Underground Railroad Followed Sexual Misconduct Investigation. If you guys didn't know, before the Sound of Freedom movie came out, like right before, Tim Ballard left Operation Underground Railroad, and there was no indication as to why or what happened. So it says Tim Ballard's exit from Operation Underground Railroad earlier this year followed an investigation into claims of sexual misconduct involving 7 women, according to sources with direct knowledge of the organization. Sources familiar with the situation said that the self-styled anti-slavery activist, who appears to be preparing for a Senate run, invited women to act as his wife on undercover overseas missions ostensibly aimed at rescuing victims of sex trafficking. He would then allegedly coerce these women into sharing a bed or showering together, claiming that it was necessary to fool traffickers. Ballard, who was played by Jim Caviezel in The Sound of Freedom, is said to have sent at least one woman a photo of himself in his underwear, festooned with fake tattoos, and to have asked another how far she was willing to go, in the words of a source, to save children. These sources requested anonymity because they fear retaliation. And this is why I think Tim Ballard himself is extremely culty and grifty, because he was using coercion and using this like fear and emotionally charged subject of saving the children to literally ask women how far they would go with him when it likely was completely unnecessary. The article goes on to say that the total number of women involved is believed to be higher than 7 because the 7 only account for employees, not contractors or volunteers. One source close to OUR has detailed knowledge of Ballard making sexual advances to a volunteer using methods similar to those he allegedly used with OUR employees. Those methods are also consistent with his conduct towards another former volunteer who spoke to Vice News. Oh my God. So, this information also corroborates an anonymous letter that was circulating in the Utah philanthropic community for several months that people couldn't really decide or get official confirmation on whether or not this letter was entirely accurate. But the letter said several weeks ago, an OUR employee who accompanied Tim on an undercover operation filed a sexual harassment complaint against him with OUR's HR department. The letter, which was sent this summer to donors in anti-trafficking cases, read, "This resulted in an extensive internal investigation into Tim and his individual operation tactics that led to more women speaking up as a part of the investigation process. It was ultimately revealed through disturbingly specific and parallel accounts that Tim has been deceitfully and extensively grooming and manipulating multiple women for the past few years with the ultimate intent of coercing them to participate in sexual acts with him, under the premise of going wherever it takes and doing whatever it takes to save a child." It's also been said in that article that OUR's board and lawyers and even the women involved actually don't want to talk about this further and decided not to make comments or say anything about Tim Ballard's exit from the organization because they are hoping to move forward without him and they don't want it to impact the ability of OUR to continue with its mission of saving the children after his departure. I would hope that means they are changing a lot of their practices and policies, because if you watch some of my former videos or Mormon Stories podcast or Lynn Packer, there's a lot more that is harmful about OUR than just Tim Ballard as the founder and these acts that he is being accused of participating in. So initially, Tim Ballard did not respond to the Vice News journalist's request for comment. He did make that video that was going around where he just was kind of screaming to the cameras that nothing is true, nothing you hear is true, none of this is a thing. But then he did officially issue a statement through his new organization that he made after leaving OUR called the Spear Fund. He says, "As with all of the assaults on my character and integrity over many years, the latest tabloid-driven sexual allegations are false. They are baseless inventions designed to destroy me and the movement we have built to end the trafficking and exploitation of vulnerable children. During my time at OUR, I designed strict guidelines for myself and our operators in the field. Sexual contact was prohibited, and I led by example. Given our meticulous attention to this issue, any suggestion of inappropriate sexual contact is categorically false. The Spear Fund strongly encourages journalists to watch this recent episode of the highly respected Marisol Nichols podcast, which offers specific context around the child rescue operations process." And oh, do I have something to say about that. So the actress Marisol Nichols also has a anti-child sex trafficking organization called A Slavery-Free World, and Tim Ballard sits on the board of that nonprofit organization. But wouldn't you know that Marisol Nichols is a Scientologist? And you would think if someone is against child trafficking or child sex trafficking, or is in any way interested in saving the children, they wouldn't be participating in and donating money to a horrible, high control cult and horrendous organization that traffics children in their ecclesiastical, highest up position that you can be in the church, called the Sea Organization, where they force child labor and they do traffic them across international borders for that labor. Scientology also protects child abusers and sexual predators like Danny Masterson, and Scientology's involvement in covering up for Danny Masterson has been greatly detailed in the criminal trial against him and will be even more greatly detailed in the civil case that has been filed against Danny Masterson and the Church of Scientology for the harassment and bullying the Jane Does experienced at the hand of their fair game policy. So I'm so sorry, Tim Ballard. I really do not care or put any weight on what Marisol Nichols has to say about you or Operation Underground Railroad or anything that has to do with saving children. Because if she cared, she would understand that the call is coming from inside the house. These are not the end of the scandals that are surrounding Operation Underground Railroad and Tim Ballard that are coming out this week, as reported by Vice News. Another article was released yesterday on September 19th, 2023, titled Sound of Freedom Producer Felt the Naked Breasts of Apparently Underage Trafficking Victim. I am not going to go into the full details of this story. One, because I do not want to talk about it. And two, because I don't want to get flagged anywhere for talking about it. But you can go read the Vice article and listen to or read the entire context of what happened, why this happened, and why we think it's a problem. So this is an allegation against a man named Paul Hutchinson, who worked very closely with Operation Underground Railroad and Tim Ballard for years before they had some kind of falling out and cut ties several years ago. But Paul Hutchinson did directly produce the Sound of Freedom movie, and he fully admits to these acts taking place. This act was allegedly caught on video, and Paul Hutchinson says that he stands behind his actions and that he always carried himself in an appropriate way, and basically is just saying that this was something that he had to do as part of one of their operations and one of their jumps, and he was completely justified in doing so. Paul Hutchinson, however, did refute that this person was a minor. He said that he swore that this person was over 18 and he would never have done that if it was a minor. However, the investigation behind this suggests that she was 16 years old. The issue with this is that when other investigators who work in the child trafficking field were asked about this incident, they said that it goes against best practices and that in other organizations, this would never be allowed. This was also part of an organization where Paul Hutchinson was asking traffickers for younger women, more underage girls. And the criticism is that this can create demand for children to be trafficked when there was no demand or children being trafficked before. So instead of going in and investigating or saving children from something that was occurring, it in turn creates the demand where there might not have been none. So it creates child sex trafficking victims instead of saving them that they can then save them from, but they might not have had to save them from anything if they didn't create the demand in the first place. So it's just bad investigation practices. It's not recommended by other government entities or US government entities that they go about saving children in this. If you thought that was the end of the OUR scandals that Vice News is reporting on, you would be wrong. Vice News has also released a new article today, September 20th, 2023, that's titled Operation Underground Railroad Child Rescue Missions Were Based on Psychic Intelligence. And this article just goes into more detail of what I mentioned earlier in the video, where Tim Ballard heavily relied on a psychic medium channeling a Mormon prophet from 600 BC to direct missions and try to find children that were allegedly being trafficked. This article just goes super in depth on that because in the documents that Vice News obtained based on these investigations into OUR and Tim Ballard, which, by the way, in full transparency, did not lead to any charges of Operation Underground Railroad or Tim Ballard. They still documented how involved this psychic medium was in these missions and that this was not disclosed to investors or to people donating to Operation Underground Railroad. The article does detail how this psychic led to very expensive Operation Underground Railroad missions that never produced any results. They searched for a specific child in a specific location that the psychic directed them to and never found the child there. And to anyone's knowledge, none of the other information provided by the psychic ever led to any children being saved, but did lead to a lot of money being spent chasing down these leads. I highly recommend that you go read all of these Vice News articles and all of the articles they've done since 2020 reporting on Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, as well as, like I said, the Mormon Stories podcast and Lynn Packer and all of the great work done by these journalists and people reporting on this issue. I will try my best to link whatever I can in the description and the show notes. I hope this provided a little bit more clarity on what is going on with Tim Ballard in the media right now. And I hope you found this interesting and it can provide more context into why the Sound of Freedom movie is being so criticized. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching or listening. Please like wherever you are, subscribe wherever you are watching or listening, and I will see you next time on No Culty Vibes. Bye.